She stood over the blood-stained note with her hands trembling and her breath stuck in her throat as the hallway light flickered and the door behind her creaked open slow, like something alive, and the sound of the little girl crying upstairs crashed. Through the house again, a raw sound of pain that clawed at the plaster and at the heart of anyone who heard it, and she whispered, "Please stop, please stop," while the note bled red into the grain of the wood and the wind pushed the front curtains inward, and the frame rattled like teeth chattering from fear. The house smelled like old rain and lemon cleaner and something metallic that did not belong, and the cry of the child bent and lifted like a siren, and the woman named May gripped the banister hard enough to make her knuckles pale. And she started up the staircase because no one else was moving, and because the silence after each cry felt like a knife above her head, waiting to fall. And she knew if she did not climb, now she never would. At the top of the stairs, a hallway ran narrow and dim with a single bulb sputtering and a family portrait hanging crooked. She reached out to straighten it, then stopped because a long hairline crack split the glass right through the smile of the man in the center, and for a heartbeat, she saw her own face reflected there. Eyes wide, mouth open, the kind of mouth that looks like it is about to call a name for help, and does not know which name to choose. The next cry broke and dragged on the air, and May moved to the second door where a stuffed rabbit lay torn open at the seam, beads of plastic eyes scattered like marbles, and a silver chain caught the light beneath the bed frame. She knelt to reach it, hearing her own shoes scuff on old boards, and her palm brushed dust, and a small bead rolled against her wrist, warm from the room and oddly heavy, like a secret someone had been forced to swallow. She heard a whisper behind the door, not the little girl this time, but a low, steady tone, a voice trying to sound calm and failing, and the words were too quiet to catch, so she pressed her ear to the wood and tasted paint on the air, and then a sharper whisper cut through, "Stay quiet. Do not make him angry," and the hairs along her arms lifted because the voice belonged to a boy, and the boy sounded like he had spent years learning how to be invisible. May turned the knob and the room opened on a narrow bed, a cracked window, and a small dresser with stickers half peeled away. The girl sat on the floor, knees to chest hair tangled, face wet and red, and her little hands were clamped to her ears. A pattern of bruised fingerprints, old and fading and new and dark, blooming along her arms like storm clouds, and the boy crouched beside her with his body curved around her like a shield, even though he himself trembled like a wire in wind. It was then the front door slammed downstairs and thunder moved through the bones of the house, and both children flinched and May froze. Because the weight in that sound was not careless. It was purposeful, like a hammer hitting a nail straight and hard and without hesitation, and a voice rose below, deep, clean, cold, and it filled the stairwell as if the walls were made to carry it. "Where is she? And where are they? And why is there blood in my home?" The girl jerked and made a small animal sound, and May knelt to her level and said a name soft. The name Lily, and the boy's name, Aaron, and she told them the voice was only a man, coming home, and that they were safe. Then the boy shook his head with a tiny, desperate motion and said, "Do not lie to us. Not now." And May felt the shape of the truth slide beneath her feet like river stones. Because of course he was right, and she did not know if safety existed in this house at all. The heavy steps climbed, and the boy stood up and put his body between the door and his sister, and his thin shoulders squared in a way that cracked May's heart, and he said to May, "Take her, hide in the closet and do not breathe." And for a moment May wanted to laugh because the closet was nothing but a slatted door and a stack of winter coats, and what good was hiding behind slats and cloth when a voice like the one on the stairs was filling the air like a storm? And still she scooped Lily into her arms and back toward the closet, because sometimes a bad plan is still a plan, and the heartbeat of a child against your chest is orders you cannot ignore. The footsteps reached the landing, and paused as if the man was smelling the hallway like a hunter, and then he began to move again. Not rushing, not dragging, simply coming and coming, and the sound made May think of trickling water. Except the water was iron, and the iron wanted to find them. The closet door breathed dust when she pulled it open, and the coats swung like slow bodies, and Lily clung to May's neck with nails like bird claws, and the boy stayed where he was, back straight, chin lifted, hands loose at his sides, as if he was meeting a teacher rather than a storm. The man stepped into the room, a tall shape cut out of the hallway light, his suit jacket still on but his tie pulled loose and his eyes like fresh slate, the kind that shows every small mark and never forgives. And May recognized him with a start that stung like static because she had seen that face 100 times on screens and billboards and magazines, a man whose voice announced new hospitals and new scholarships, a story the city liked, to tell itself about generosity and gold light and second chances. And now he stood in a child's room with the light flickering and the floorboards groaning, and he looked at the boy and said, "Where is your mother?" The boy swallowed and said, "She went out." And the man gave a small laugh without warmth and said she went out and left the walls to listen to a child screaming and left a note downstairs bleeding onto my table. And May felt Lily flinch and curl tighter, and she wanted to say something and could not trust her own mouth. Then the man crouched to the boy's height, still not looking toward the closet, perhaps not seeing it or perhaps ignoring it, and said, "Who hurt her?" And the boy's throat worked, and he said, "You did." And the word hung in the air like a thrown knife that does not fall. For a heartbeat the room held its breath, and then the man stood and the air shifted, and May realized he had not come home. Unaware he had come home prepared. His voice rose and rolled over the walls. Lily's cries had left shaking, and he shouted the kind of shout that stops a crowded room, the kind that freezes men who think they fear nothing. And it was not rage alone that lived in his voice. It was grief, and something like terror, and he said, "Bring her out. May, I know you are in that closet, and I swear to you nothing will touch you while I am standing here. But if you hide one more second, I cannot protect you from what is already inside this house." May pulled the slats with her fingers and stepped out, because when a man uses your name like that, you learn what it means to be seen without wanting. And Lily's face burrowed into her shoulder, and the man softened by 1 degree and stretched a hand, but did not touch, because he seemed to know that touch would break something that could not be mended. And he said, "I need to see her arms. I need to see where the pain is, because I need to know if the monster I fought when I was a child has learned a new face inside my home." The boy looked up fast, and a flash of understanding lit his eyes, and May saw then that this boy had been mapping the currents of adults for years, and he moved to the dresser and pulled the bottom drawer and lifted a thin notebook with a cover of blue stars, and he held it out and said, "If you want the truth, it is in here." And the man took the notebook with hands that did not shake, and he opened to the first page, and whatever he saw made his jaw tighten and his eyes flicker, and the next page made the vein in his temple beat, and the next page made him close the book slow, as a door to a room full of ghosts. Lily's breath hitched, and her body quivered like a struck string, and May whispered, "You are safe," and felt like a liar. And the man said quietly, "Aaron, when did you start keeping this?" And the boy said, "When the crying would not stop and nobody believed me." And the man nodded once and looked at May and said, "These entries are times, dates, voices, threats, sounds of doors, sounds of belts, names of visitors who arrived when I was out. Names I know and names I do not." And then he looked at the ceiling as if there were answers in the plaster, and he said, "Someone is using my name as a shield while hurting my child." The wind pressed against the cracked window, and the torn rabbit ear lifted and fell, and the whole room seemed to sway. Then the floorboard just inside the doorway whispered under a new weight, and May felt the change like cold water poured down the spine, because the man in the suit shifted his stance not in fear but in readiness, and the boy slid 1 step to the side, and Lily's fingers dug deeper into May's collar. And a new voice arrived from the hallway, a voice smooth and oily and familiar, in the way a knife is familiar once you have been cut by it. And it said, "I thought we agreed to keep the musical performances down when the neighbors are close." The man's eyes went hard like river stones in winter, and he smiled without joy and said, "You are early." And the voice in the hallway laughed soft and said, "And you are late." And May felt that laugh in her teeth, because the shape that stepped into the room wore a uniform that looked official, a badge that flashed gold and blue, and yet the way he leaned against the doorframe told a different story. A story of someone who knew where the cameras were and how to look past them, the way someone looks past an animal in a cage and counts the bars. The uniformed man glanced at the notebook now half hidden beneath the dresser, and at the slatted closet, and at Lily's small feet tucked against May's hip, and he smiled a small smile that did not reach his eyes and said, "Busy evening, I see." And the boy said, "Leave us alone." And the uniformed man turned the smile toward the boy and said, "The world is not so simple. Son, trust me." And the man in the suit moved one step closer to the uniformed man and said, "Trust you is a phrase you should not try inside this house." May felt the air thicken as if the walls were leaning in to listen, and the uniformed man lifted one hand palm open, a theatrical gesture of peace, and said, "I came because the neighbors called, and the neighbors are donors, and donors are important too. All of us, including you and I, thought I would help settle the family for the night, and the man in the suit said the family will be settled when the truth is spoken, and the uniformed man said, truth is a game of angles and paperwork and signatures." And he let the last word linger like a hook and looked at May as if inviting her to nod along. Downstairs, something shifted again. The faint scrape of a heel across tile, the sound of a bag set on a table, and a whisper of perfume moving with the air. And the girl in May's arms lifted her head in a small, startled movement and said, "Mommy," in a breath that scraped and held hope and terror in equal measure. And May's ribs seemed to tighten around her own breath, and the man in the suit closed his eyes once as if steadying himself, and the uniformed man tilted his head like a bird listening to a worm under leaves. The front door clicked shut, and the perfumed whisper came up the stairs, and a woman stepped into the hallway with her hair pinned and her eyes glassy, like someone who has been awake too long or dreaming too hard. And she stopped in the doorway and took in the room and every person. And she did not look surprised. She only looked tired. And she said, "We were supposed to fix this before you got back." And the man in the suit said, "Fix is an interesting word." And the uniformed man said, "Ma'am, let me do the talking." And she said no, and her voice trembled and then steadied like a bridge settling onto its bearings. She took one step into the room, and her heel caught a bead from the rabbit's eye, and it skittered, and she placed her foot carefully and said to Lily, "I am sorry," and to Aaron, "I am sorry," and to May, "Thank you for staying." And then to the man in the suit, she said, "I did not know how to tell you, because every time I tried, my courage failed, and someone told me he would bury me if I spoke." And the uniformed man made a quiet sound like a warning, and she went on anyway and said, "The monster in this house is not who you think it is." And May felt Lily stiffen, and the boy's breath stopped, and the man in the suit did not move except his hand curled slowly, and the floor seemed to tilt under all of them. The woman's gaze flicked to the notebook, then to the uniformed man, then finally to the man in the suit, and she said, "The monster used your money and your name and your signature and your calendar to make sure no one could say no." And she lifted her left hand, and there was a mark, like a bruise in the shape of a ring that was not on her finger. And she said, "I took the ring off because I could not carry the weight anymore." And the uniformed man whispered, "Careful." And she said, "I am finished being careful." And the child in May's arms buried her face again, and the boy shut his eyes like someone standing on a cliff edge listening for the wave. The man in the suit lifted his head, and the light found a scar along his jaw that looked old and healed but not forgotten, and his voice when it came was low and threaded with something like resolve. He said, "Say his name," and the woman opened her mouth, and the uniformed man moved fast, like a door slamming shut, and his hand went to the radio at his shoulder, and another to the back of his belt, and May could not see what he was reaching for, and the man in the suit stepped between him and the children, as if he had been built for that single motion, and his shout rose and struck the ceiling and came down like thunder enough to still every living thing in the house as he roared, "Do not take one more step toward my children." The radio crackled somewhere between them, and the hallway bulb flared white and went dim, and a distant siren grew like a line drawn in air, and the woman's lips shaped a name that did not yet reach sound, and the uniformed man smiled a tight, dangerous smile and said, "Then you should not have invited me inside." And May felt a thin, cold thread pull tight around the room, and the boy reached for the notebook, like a diver reaching for air. And Lily whispered a single word that made the woman flinch and made the man in the suit go still as stone, and the word was "Daddy." and the next sound from the stairwell made May's heart stop, because a second set of boots was coming up the steps, and whoever wore them was humming the family's favorite lullaby in a voice May recognized from the recordings on billboards and the gala stage and the radio interviews, a voice that should not be here at all. And yet, it was coming closer now. The humming drifted up the staircase like a thread of sugar hiding a razor, and every face in the room turned toward the landing as the second set of boots kept time with the lullaby that had once soothed scraped knees and nightmares in a home that had not yet learned how to lie, and May felt Lily's breath catch against her shoulder, while Aaron's fingers tightened on the star-covered notebook as if ink could become a shield when voices could not. The man in the suit stood in front of the children. Shoulders squared, eyes locked on the doorway where the song was approaching, and the uniformed man rolled his wrist just enough to flash the edge of metal at his belt. Not a promise. Not yet. A threat, and the woman at the threshold pressed one palm to the frame to steady herself, as if the house itself had begun to sway under the weight of the truth it had swallowed. The lullaby reached the last gentle turn of its melody and stopped, and a shadow cut the hallway light, before a second man stepped into view. Wearing the same face as the man in the suit, yet younger by a handful of sleepless nights, and carrying a different heat in the eyes, a polished warmth that looked like generosity from far away and like hunger from close up, and for one suspended breath the room seemed to hold two reflections of the same life standing inches apart, each choosing where to place his hands and whose name to speak. First, Lily's whisper of "Daddy" floated again, small and cracked, and both men flinched in the same rhythm. But only one of them turned his head toward the sound of her voice, and that was the man in the suit whose shout had shaken the walls and whose tie hung loose like a truce he had not agreed to. And the newcomer with the gala voice kept his gaze on the uniformed man as if greeting a colleague after a job well done. And he smiled with careful teeth and said, "You moved quickly." And the uniformed man said, "Neighbors donate quickly when they fear noise." May felt truth rising from the floorboards like cold and old air, and she asked herself whether a city could be fooled by the wrong star when both stars wore the same constellation, and the woman by the frame took another step into the room and said to the newcomer, "You were not supposed to be here." And his smile did not move, and he said, "My home, my timelines, my children," and his eyes drifted at last to the closet slats, then to the torn rabbit, then to Lily and May's arms, and a muscle ticked along his jaw like a second hand marking the moment a mask slips. Aaron loosened his grip on the notebook and lifted it higher like an offering or a warning, and the man in the suit reached back without looking and steadied the boy with the edge of his hand, a touch so practiced and gentle it told a history without a single sentence. And the newcomer's gaze flickered there and cooled, and he said to the uniformed man, "Shall we clear the room?" And the uniformed man answered with a small tilt of the head that translated to, "Not yet," because he had not collected what he came for. The woman wet her lips and said to the newcomer, "Your name paid for the visits, your calendar covered the hours your assistant opened. The back door your friends wore badges and carried forms, and every time I tried to speak, someone in your circle smiled and thanked me for my loyalty, and told me mothers must be brave for the dream." And the word dream cracked like thin ice under the weight of a truck, and Lily made a soft sound that was not a cry and not a word, and May felt it travel through her bones. The newcomer took 2 slow steps into the room, and the air around him changed temperature as if an invisible door had swung open to a room full of winter, and the man in the suit shifted just enough to keep his body between the children and that cold. And he said to the woman, "Say his name." And to the uniformed man he said, "Stay where you are." And to the newcomer he said, "I know exactly what you have done, and I am done with ghosts." The uniformed man let out a small chuckle that did not belong to joy and said, "Gentlemen, we all serve the same city, and the city prefers quiet." And the man in the suit replied, "The city prefers light." And the uniformed man answered, "Maybe for the statues and the speeches, but not for paperwork and signatures and favors." And he let the last word hover like a price tag, and the newcomer looked satisfied by that word, as if it were a coin turning in his palm. Aaron took a step forward, small and brave, and he spoke to the newcomer in a voice that shook but did not break. "You are not my father, And the newcomer laughed once without sound and said, "Your father is busy and I have been very good at being his echo." And the word echo slid across May's skin like oil, and she understood something that made her stomach drop, because an echo can fill a room and fool a crowd and drown out a cry without ever being the source. The man in the suit touched Aaron's shoulder again and said to the boy, "You see clearly, hold that." And then he looked at the woman and asked again, "Say his name." And she closed her eyes and said, "Detective Hale," and the uniformed man's smile thinned like a piece of string pulled hard, and he said, "Names can be dangerous in crowded rooms." And the man in the suit said, "Truth is more dangerous when it has been starved." From downstairs came the low thud of a drawer opening and the whisper of envelopes sliding, and May realized there was someone else in the house, someone who had entered while all eyes were fixed on the doorway, and Lily stiffened again as if feeling a draft pass straight through her, and Aaron's gaze darted to the floor where a square of light had appeared at the baseboard, a tiny glow as if a secret compartment was breathing. The newcomer followed Aaron's gaze, and in a blink he was at the wall pressing a hidden latch that clicked and released a narrow panel, and behind it sat a small safe with the family crest stamped deep and proud, and the newcomer looked over his shoulder at the man in the suit with a glint of triumph and said, "Tell me you have the code." And the man in the suit said, 14. Numbers and a truth you cannot manufacture. And the newcomer tapped the keypad anyway, like a pianist playing a piece. He had rehearsed only in dreams, and the safe stayed silent, and he turned his eyes back to the uniformed man with a question carved inside them. Detective Hale took a lazy step toward the safe as if admiring art, and said, "Sometimes a court order opens doors faster than codes, and sometimes a public scandal opens them faster still." And the woman breathed in sharply at the word scandal and glanced at May, then at Lily, then at the man in the suit, and said, "We cannot let them take the recordings." And May felt the ground pitch, because recordings meant sound or image proof that could end careers and save lives and place targets on backs all at once. The man in the suit nodded once, and his hand slipped into his jacket and came out empty, yet his stance changed like a door locking quietly, and the newcomer watched with a predator's patience, as if waiting to see which way the wind would bend the grass. And Aaron moved to the dresser and pulled it from the wall just enough to expose a second thin panel with star stickers, trying and failing to hide a seam. And he looked at May and then at his father, and May saw the plea in his eyes, not "help me, but trust me." And she did. With a quick motion, the boy popped the panel and pulled out a tiny device, no larger than a gum packet, its surface worn smooth by fear and repetition. And he pressed his thumb to it, and a blue light winked once and went steady, and Lily tugged May's collar and whispered the word "safe" again. But this time the word sounded like a place, not an object, and May understood the device had never been the treasure. The treasure was somewhere else, and the device was a key. The newcomer's lullaby voice thinned into something sharp, and he said, "Give that to me." Aaron shook his head and said, "It will go where blood cannot, and where money cannot, and where badges cannot." And the woman sucked in a breath and whispered, "Mailbox." And the newcomer moved faster than thought, crossing the room in 2 strides, reaching for the boy's wrist, and the man in the suit intercepted wrist to wrist, the sound of tendons groaning like rope under strain. And Detective Hale stepped forward to break them apart, but May stepped sideways into his path, surprising herself with the boldness in her body, and he paused just long enough for the balance to tilt. The blue light on the device blinked 3 times, then turned green, and in the silence that followed, a soft mechanical click sounded from the hallway, followed by the smallest rattle as if somewhere a slot had opened, and something had slid into darkness, and the newcomer swore under his breath in a tone that belonged to back rooms, not charity galas. And Aaron smiled without showing teeth and said, "It is gone." Detective Hale did not hesitate this time. He reached for his radio and for the back of his belt, and May saw the metal clearing leather and knew the room was about to rip open, and Lily hid her face, and the woman spoke quickly. "Wait, there is more," and Hale kept moving, and the man in the suit said, "Stay behind me to the children," and then he raised his voice again, not in rage, but command enough to stop a stampede, and barked, "Hale, drop it," and Hale did not. And then both men were in motion, and the world shrank to hands, elbows, shoulders, breath, the smell of sweat and starch and old dust. A picture frame flew off, the wall and shattered, and the crack across the glass split wider like a line of lightning, and the newcomer slipped past the tangle to the safe again, punching at the keypad with a gambler's calm, and the woman darted to the dresser and pulled out another thin notebook, this one red and bound with twine, and she pressed it into May's free hand, whispering, "If I do not make it out, give this to the reporter." And May said, "Which reporter?" And the woman said, "The one who lost her job after the hospital story," and May nodded because, even without a name, she knew exactly who that was and why a city might want her to stop asking questions. The scuffle ended with a thud and a gasp, and Hale's weapon skittered under the bed, while the man in the suit pinned his arm and knee to the floor with a precision that spoke of training he never advertised, and Hale laughed, breathless, and said, "Cameras love a hero saving his own children," and the man in the suit replied, "Cameras love a villain," exposed by his own arrogance, and then a new voice rolled up the stairs through the open front door. A chorus of officers, a dispatcher's crackle, a neighbor's shouted question, and the house filled with the knowledge that the world had arrived to choose its story. The newcomer straightened his tie in the mirror over the dresser, caught his own reflection, and smiled, the performance smile that had raised millions and built wings on hospitals. And he turned to the children and said, "Sweethearts, come to me now," and the word sweethearts curdled in the air, and Aaron stepped backward instead, and Lily clung tighter, and the woman said, "Do not go with him," and her voice broke like a bridge under one too many trucks. And the newcomer said, "You will confuse them," and she said, "They are not confused," and she lifted her chin and pointed at the man in the suit and said, "He is their father." And the newcomer's smile cracked like porcelain at the edge, and then set again as if someone glued it while the room watched. Footsteps pounded on the porch, and a knock like a judge's gavel shook the frame, and voices announced themselves through the wood, and Detective Hale hissed to the newcomer, "Do not let them search the safe." And the newcomer whispered, "Back, I will control the narrative," and Hale said, "Narratives lose to evidence," and the newcomer replied, "Not when the evidence disappears," and he glanced at the safe again, with a heat that burned May from where she stood. Aaron slid along the wall, and crouched by the bed, reaching for Hale's fallen weapon with a cautious hand, not to grab it but to kick it farther out of reach, and Hale saw and snapped his leg to block, and the boy yelped, and the man in the suit shifted instinctively, leaving a finger width of space between his hold on Hale and the floor, and Hale used it to twist and break free enough to lunge for the boy, and the woman screamed, and May moved without thinking, turning her body to shield both children and the blue light. Device in Aaron's hand pulsed once in answer, as if some distant latch acknowledged the bravery of a small body standing tall. The front door opened and uniformed officers spilled in, and the first who entered the bedroom doorway scanned the scene, and froze because two powerful men shared one face, and an internal compass spun, and he looked from Detective Hale to the man in the suit, to the newcomer, to the woman, to the children, to May, and his training told him to pick the clearest story. But the room offered none, and Lily whispered, "Daddy," again, and both men answered yes at the same time, one with tenderness and one with performance. And the officer blinked as if a camera had flashed. May's fingers found the twine on the red notebook and tucked it under her shirt at the waistband, while her other arm held Lily, and her mind sketched paths through the next 3 minutes. 3 doors, 3 stair treads, 3 lies and 1 truth. And the woman pressed her hand over her own mouth to stop another scream, and the newcomer lifted both palms in a practiced gesture of peace, as if bathed in golden light on a stage, and said, "Officers, thank goodness you are here. We had an intruder threatening my children and my wife, and this brave detective responded to my call," and the words fell into the room like coins that change hands without leaving fingerprints. The man in the suit laughed, then a hard, short sound with no humor, and said, "Officers, I am the legal father of these children, and this man is using my face and my name to shield crimes against my family, and you can verify it in the safe behind him if he has not already erased it." And the newcomer's head turned in a slow warning, and Detective Hale began to speak over him, both aiming to drown the other out, when a small voice cut through them, all Aaron's voice, thin but carrying, and he said, "If you want the truth, follow me." and he stepped sideways toward the hallway door, with the blue light device raised, like a lantern, and May felt the current of the entire house tilt toward him, because sometimes a child becomes the only steady thing left in a storm. The newcomer moved to block him, and the man in the suit moved to block the newcomer, and Detective Hale moved to block them both, and the officers hesitated on the threshold with the indecision of men who know one wrong step will become tomorrow's headline. And the woman whispered mailbox again, but this time she added basement, and the word basement cracked open a new fear in May, because basements hold what houses are built on and what they are hiding, and Aaron nodded as if reading her thought and said the basement first, and then the mailbox, and the blue light on the device brightened to a steady glow like it was waiting for a door to be opened. The officers stepped aside without meaning to, and the corridor filled with the press of bodies moving in opposing directions, and the air tasted like dust and lemon cleaner, and the metallic ghost from the note downstairs, and as Aaron reached the top step, a sound rose from beneath the floor, a slow mechanical whine like an old machine waking after a long sleep, and the house vibrated just enough to jostle the picture frames and make Lily lift her head, and for an instant May saw a square of shadow shift in the hallway floorboards where there had been none before, as if the house itself was revealing a mouth, and the next second a breath of cold air rushed up from below, carrying the smell of damp concrete and solder and something else that smelled like old secrets ready to be told. And Aaron looked back over his shoulder at his father, at May, at his sister, and said, "You hear it too." And before anyone could answer, the trap door in the hallway slid open with a sigh, and a set of narrow iron stairs unfolded into the dark. Waiting below, cold air rose from the open trapdoor and curled around ankles like river mist at dawn, and the iron stairs breathed a faint metallic whine as Aaron set one foot onto the first rung, and the blue light in his hand steadied and brightened, as if glad to finally find its own home, and May tightened her hold on Lily while the man in the suit moved behind the boy, with the quiet readiness of someone who learned long ago how to protect a path without blocking it. Detective Hale stepped forward as if to claim the lead, and one of the officers caught his sleeve without thinking, a reflex, born from a whisper in the room that said, "This man holds too many keys," and the newcomer watched with a smile that showed perfect rehearsal, while his eyes tracked every angle of the hallway, as if counting where the cameras would later stand, and the woman pressed her back to the wall and closed her eyes just long enough to gather a courage she had been borrowing for years, and when she opened them again, there was something new there, something like steel painted with grief. The iron steps chattered softly as the group began to descend, Aaron first, the man in the suit next, May with Lily on her hip, and the woman close behind, and an officer followed with a flashlight that painted soft slices of light on the narrow walls, and Detective Hale came last after, reclaiming his arm with a small shrug that said, "None of this matters as long as the ending goes my way." And the newcomer stayed at the top of the stairs with two officers and a pose that said he owned daylight and whatever hid from it, the basement, hit their faces with damp and the ghost of solder and the hum of old machines. And May blinked into the dark where shapes loomed like forgotten furniture, until the blue device pulsed and a strip of LEDs sparked to life along the floor, tracing a thin path toward the far wall where concrete met brick, and brick met a rectangle of steel with no handle and no hinges and only a keyhole, the shape of a crescent moon. Aaron lifted the device and the crescent glowed faintly, and a low click rolled through the room like a heartbeat, and the steel panel slid to the side with a sigh, revealing a chamber no bigger than a walk-in closet, lined with soundproofing foam and 4 shelves and a single chair, and a microphone hanging from the ceiling, like a patient spider, and a camera eye the size of a coin, linked to a recorder that looked older than the boy himself, yet tended with the tenderness of a garden, and on the shelves lay flash drives labeled in small careful handwriting, and a stack of envelopes sealed and numbered, and a photograph clipped to the inside wall that made May's breath stick because it showed Lily asleep with a small bruise on her wrist, and Aaron in the doorway with his jaw set, and a shadow on the floor that did not match either child. The man in the suit exhaled like someone who had been holding a piece of sky in his chest, and the woman covered her mouth and stepped into the chamber as if into a confessional, and traced a finger along the edge of the recorder and said, "I taught him how to use this on a night when my hands would not stop shaking." And the boy said softly, "I started before that. With a phone, you once said I was too young to have." And the woman winced and nodded. Because a truth can sometimes be both a wound and a bandage. The officer with the flashlight swallowed hard and said, "I need to secure this." And the man in the suit said, "You need to listen first." And May felt her skin prickle with the electricity that fills a space right before a storm, when everything holds still and waits for the first drop to fall, and Aaron pressed the device to a slot at the base of the recorder, and the blue light went green, and a red light woke on the recorder, and the first file began to speak into the room with the soft, static sigh of memory. Lullaby played at low volume, sung by a voice that matched the newcomer. Exactly, honeyed, gentle, flawless, and beneath it, a second voice, a whisper like paper against paper, the sound of a person asking a child to be brave and to keep secrets for the dream. And May knew that whisper and knew the perfume that had accompanied it. And she looked at the woman whose fingers were now pressed into her hair like anchors, and the woman's eyes flooded with a grief so clean it almost shone. The second file picked up the sound of a belt sliding through loops, then the mute thud of it dropped to the floor, followed by Lily's cry and Aaron's breath saying, I am here, and a male voice ordering. Silence in a tone that offered warmth above and punishment below, the kind of voice that builds empires and breaks spines. And the officer with the flashlight shut his eyes, as if the dark might erase the sound, and the man in the suit braced his palm against the doorframe and looked like a man holding back an ocean with one hand. Detective Hale stepped close, now his face calm like a number written in clean chalk, and he said, "This proves nothing. Because anyone can stage a recording, and voices can be spliced, and children can be coached, and perception is a currency that buys anything." And the man in the suit answered, "Perception changes like weather, but pattern stays like a riverbed." And then Aaron switched to a file stamped with a date from 2 weeks ago, and the room filled with the newcomer's voice giving instructions to Hale about how to enter the house when the cameras were off, and which gate to use, and how to handle a neighbor who asked about the crying. And Hale said, "Assure them the family is under care and we are monitoring wellness." And the newcomer laughed lightly and said always the right words for the right ears. And the officer with the flashlight now looked at Hale like a man seeing a double exposure, resolve into one picture. The woman reached for a sealed envelope on the top shelf and turned it over to show the handwriting across the back, a smooth, elegant scrawl that matched signatures on public checks and awards and building plaques, and she said he wrote this for the board last month when he promised to take a break for family health, and inside is a confession that he rehearsed for cameras and never delivered. And the newcomer's laugh floated down the stairs like a silk ribbon, tied too tight, and he called into the dark, "Careful, sweetheart. You are not well, and we will get you help." And the woman's hand steadied in a way that said she had been called unwell for years, and the word had finally burned to ash. May felt Lily shift and pull back, just enough to see the chamber and the shelves and the little coin camera, and the child's face changed in small stares, from fear to something like recognition, and she whispered "rabbit," and pointed a finger at a corner beneath the lowest shelf where the torn ear from upstairs had once been attached to a twin sitting here, the same model intact except for a tiny square cut into its back. And Aaron crouched and lifted it, and pressed the blue device to the square, and a compartment clicked open, revealing a small key of the same crescent shape as the lock on the steel panel, and the man in the suit inhaled sharply like a runner sighting the finish line. At last, footsteps clanged on the iron stairs, and 2 more officers entered, followed by the newcomer, now compelled to descend by the gravity of evidence and performance alike. And his smile had narrowed into something thinner, his voice still velvet, as he said, "I see a lot of old equipment and a lot of stressed people, and one room designed to frighten donors with the specter of abuse, and I see a woman who needs rest, and a man who wants to take what I built, and a boy rehearsing lines given to him by a very ambitious father." And he spread his hands, as if blessing the scene, and May thought for a painful second of all the rooms where that gesture had earned trust, like water pulled from a well and handed to a thirsty crowd. Detective Hale leaned into the chamber doorway with new confidence, because pressure can either crack a man or turn him into a blade, and Hale had been sharpened by rooms like this, and he said, "Chain of custody begins now," and he reached for the recorder, and the man in the suit stepped between Hale and the shelf with a motion that spoke no more, and the officer with the flashlight shifted his weight uncertain, while the second officer looked to the newcomer for a cue, and the woman made a sound low in her throat like a warning that predators know not to ignore. Aaron lifted the crescent key and held it above his head, and spoke in the clear, simple voice of someone who is done waiting to be believed. If anyone moves without my father's permission, I will drop this into the vent and this whole proof will go dark. And the newcomer smiled thin again and said, and then you will be the boy who destroyed your own rescue. And Aaron met his eyes and said, I will be the boy who refused to let a liar choose the ending. And the silence that followed felt clean, like a wind that has blown the smoke away from a fire. May shifted Lily to her other hip and stepped deeper into the chamber, and her eyes caught a small framed document tucked nearly out of sight behind the envelopes, and she slid it free and saw a simple certificate of birth with a correction affixed like a bandage, and she read the names and felt the world tilt because the correction scratched out a middle name and added a second child born on the same day, to the same mother with the same father and the same face listed as twin A and twin B. And she looked up slowly, and the chamber seemed to narrow to a tunnel with light at the far end, and in that light stood the man in the suit, and across from him stood the newcomer, and in the tiny glass of the photo on the certificate, she saw both boys as infants, and 2 tiny hospital tags, and one signature that matched every shining plaque in the city. The woman saw what May held, and her mouth moved around the word twin without sending it into the air, and the man in the suit did not look surprised. He looked like a man finally seeing the shadow that had been walking half a step behind him for years, and the newcomer laughed softly and said, family secrets are really the best kind because you can always claim you kept them to protect love. And he tilted his head and the light caught the scar at the edge of his hairline, a small half-moon that matched the one on his brother's jaw. And suddenly the lullaby from the stairs made a deadly kind of sense. 2 voices trained to be one song, one face, trained to wear 2 lives. The officer with the flashlight cleared his throat and said, we need to go upstairs now. And the newcomer said, we will go upstairs and we will talk like adults and we will put the children to bed, and tomorrow the city will read a letter about a family in crisis and a brave uncle who stepped in when a father could not be present. And the woman laughed then, not because anything was funny, but because the sound of that plan was so smooth it left splinters, and she said, you never were the uncle. You were the fox in the chicken yard, and the badge at your side paid for the hole in the fence. Detective Hale shifted again, angling toward the recorder now with a new plan building behind his eyes. The plan of grabbing the drives and declaring emergency custody of evidence and walking out before anyone untangled the knots, and the man in the suit read that plan and stepped closer until the air between them thinned, and his voice dropped to a cord of iron, and he said, you will not touch what belongs to my children. And Hale smiled and said, everything in this room belongs to the state. Once the first officer stepped onto those stairs, and Aaron lifted the key higher and said, unless the state can reach into a vent faster than gravity, and May felt every person in the room calculate that race at the same time. From upstairs came a new sound, not boots, not neighbors, a different rhythm like soft rubber wheels on wood, and the woman looked at May with sudden alertness and whispered hush, just as Lily lifted her face and smiled a small surprise smile, and the newcomer's head snapped toward the stairs, as if he too recognized the rhythm. And then a voice called down, cheerful, polite, shaped by years of announcing soft miracles on morning television. And it said, delivery for the family from the mailbox service, time drop confirmation requested, and the man in the suit closed his eyes and let a breath go, because the old device had done what the blue light promised, and the mailbox had done what the boy believed, and the newcomer's smile vanished completely, leaving only teeth. Detective Hale swore fast and quiet and pushed past the officer toward the stairs, calculating faster now, and the officer reached to stop him, and Hale shrugged him off with a twist of trained muscle, and the man in the suit moved to block the stairs, and the woman stepped beside him, and May tightened her arms around Lily, and Aaron tucked the crescent key into his palm, and the chamber lights hummed brighter, as if they too wanted to watch, and upstairs the friendly delivery voice added a second sentence, in a tone that did not fit kindness at all. It said, press on the package for live stream verification, and someone upstairs pressed, and a red light blinked to life, and the voice continued, audio and video, active, and a chorus of gasps rose. From outside, where neighbors had gathered, and a reporter who had lost her job after the hospital story, lifted her phone like a sword and said, "We are live now, and please tell the city who cried in this house tonight." And Detective Hale froze one step up, caught between dark and daylight, and for the first time his face looked human and afraid. And the newcomer lifted his head like a stag scenting hounds, and the man in the suit said quietly to his son, to his daughter, to May, to the woman, "Stay behind me, and do not let go of each other," as the family climbed toward a doorway that had finally opened to the truth waiting on the other side. The basement hummed with the faint echo of the live stream voice carrying down through the stairwell, and every soul in that chamber knew the world above had already begun spinning its judgment faster than any hand in this room could control. Aaron clutched the crescent key with white knuckles, while Lily pressed her small cheek to May's shoulder and breathed shallow, frightened breaths. The man in the suit straightened his back and let his eyes fix on the iron steps like a soldier hearing the drumbeat to march again. The woman wiped her palms against her dress as though trying to remove years of silence from her skin, while Detective Hale crouched on the stairs, torn between rushing into daylight and retreating to the shadows where he had always thrived, and the newcomer lingered in the corner of the chamber. His smile gone now, his face taut like an animal cornered yet still dangerous. The officers looked at one another with the unease of men who suddenly realized their badges might drag them into a whirlpool larger than their paychecks could ever excuse. One lifted the radio and whispered a code, but the signal crackled back with static. The house itself seemed to swallow the call. Aaron's green, glowing device pulsed again, and the boy whispered, "It is already out there. No one can bury it now." The man in the suit put a steady hand on his son's shoulder and nodded, once pride flickering in his eyes like a small flame that refused to die even in the cold. They began the climb back up the narrow stairs, and every step felt heavier than iron, the air thick with tension. The officers trying to decide which man to shadow Hale, watching the door like a gambler measuring odds, the woman clutching the red notebook hidden beneath her sleeve, and May forcing her legs to steady under Lily's trembling weight halfway. Up the stairs the newcomer finally spoke, his voice lower than before, but still carved with silk. He said, "Listen to me. None of you understand. The city will never side with fractured stories. It will side with the face it trusts, the face that built hospitals, the face that cut ribbons on schools, the face that promises hope." And May turned and answered with a voice she did not recognize as her own. "Maybe it is time the city learns that hope is not a mask." They emerged into the hallway, and the trapdoor folded shut behind them with a slow groan, as though the house itself wanted to seal away the years of suffering. Now revealed, the front doorway spilled bright light into the hall, mixed with the flashing beams of cameras. Neighbors huddled together, whispering. Reporters jostled for position. Microphones stretched high above the heads of the curious, and somewhere among them, the woman journalist, once silenced by the hospital scandal, raised her voice strong and clear. "We are streaming. Live the truth comes from this house today, and all of you will witness it." The newcomer smoothed his jacket and stepped forward toward the threshold, his eyes gleaming with calculation. He spread his arms and said loudly, "Neighbors, friends, do not be alarmed tonight. My family endured a frightening intrusion, but we are safe, and I thank this brave detective for his timely protection." Hale lifted his chin, trying to look composed, though sweat glistened at his temple, and one officer shifted uncertain glances between the two brothers. The man in the suit cut through their theater, his voice cutting sharp as glass. "Stop lying. The real intruder has been wearing my face and using my name to shield the pain of my children for years." And the murmurs from outside thickened with disbelief and shock. Cameras clicked like relentless insects. Aaron stepped to his father's side, lifting the blue-lit device and holding it high. "See, this records everything, every threat, every visit, every cry you ignored." His words cracked but rang clear. The boy looked into the lenses outside as though daring the world to doubt him again, and Lily lifted her small head and whispered, "Daddy." And the sound slipped through microphones and cameras like an arrow piercing layers of noise and landing, true in the hearts of everyone listening. The reporter shouted, "Who hurt her? Who let this happen?" And Aaron's voice answered. Detective Hale opened the door, and the wrong twin closed it. Gasps rose. The officers stiffened, and Hale's hand twitched toward his belt. Before he remembered, the weapon lay lost below, and the woman moved forward, her voice trembling yet fierce enough to fill the hallway. I let fear keep me silent, but no more this man. My husband's twin took advantage of his absence, his power, his reputation. He and Hale covered each other's crimes, and I was told again and again to be quiet or lose everything. And tonight I choose to lose everything but silence, and she lifted the red notebook and held it high in the light. The crowd outside strained to see as if those pages glowed with the weight of truth. The newcomer laughed suddenly, a sound too smooth, too late. He stepped toward the doorframe, his teeth flashing. Neighbors, we must not mistake the ramblings of trauma for reality. This family needs healing, not a witch hunt. And yet before his charm could spin another web, the live stream feed caught the recording spilling from the basement speaker. Still connected by the device, the lullaby filled the hall with its deceptive sweetness. And then the harsh command for silence. The slap of a belt, the sob of Lily echoing against stone walls. The crowd hushed into stillness that felt heavier than thunder before a storm. The reporter thrust her microphone toward the children. Aaron, tell them who spoke those words, and the boy answered clear. It was him, pointing at the twin with the polished smile. The neighbor gasps turned into shouts, questions. Accusations. The city outside this house already rewriting its belief. The officers froze, torn between loyalty to procedure and the tidal wave of public judgment. Detective Hale snarled, "Enough, this is evidence tampering. Chain of custody will be compromised," and he lunged toward the device. May pressed Lily close and turned away, shielding her, while the man in the suit intercepted Hale with a forceful shove. Bodies colliding in the hallway, framed by flashing cameras. The crowd outside roared with the electricity of scandal. The twin's mask slipped, rage bursting through the charm. His voice no longer velvet, but jagged. "You think this city will believe a broken woman, a frightened boy, a stranger who wears my face?" And he reached toward the nearest officer, seizing his arm and whispering something too quick to catch. But the officer recoiled with eyes wide as though touched by poison. The woman stepped beside her husband, the true man in the suit, and for the first time her shoulders squared. Without trembling, she said to the cameras, "I married one man and one man only, and the man who stands with me now is the father of these children, and the man beside Detective Hale is a fraud who used our silence to carve power." The air cracked with a sudden crash as the front window shattered from the outside rocks hurled by hands. Angry, confused, terrified, the crowd swelled, pressing forward with chants of truth, truth, truth. The officers scrambled to hold the line, shouting commands while neighbors shouted louder, and in the chaos Hale shoved again, trying to seize the recorder. The man in the suit grappled him into the broken frame glass scattering across the floor. May pulled Lily back into the living room corners while Aaron pressed the device to his chest, determined not to let it go. The newcomer raised his voice to the crowd, still trying to claw back control. "Neighbors, do not be fooled. Do you want to see your hospitals fall? Do you want your scholarships cut? Do you want hope torn away? Do not listen to lies." But his voice faltered, because the crowd answered with a roar of betrayal. "We want truth." And his face hardened into something raw. The mask fully shattered, revealing not a leader, but a predator. Cornered at that moment, the journalist stepped into the doorway, her phone raised, live stream. Steady, her voice firm. "I lost my job once for speaking truth about the money behind the hospital, but I will not lose my voice tonight. These children deserve justice. The woman deserves to be heard, and the city deserves to know that sometimes even golden names carry rot." And the man in the suit turned toward her, nodded once, his jaw tight with gratitude and pain alike, and he said, "Then show them everything." Aaron pressed the device and the red notebook together in the reporter's hands and whispered, "Do not stop," and she promised with eyes burning. The live stream caught every motion, every shout, every crack in the false twin's face and Hale's desperate struggle. The world was now watching every second unfolding, raw, uncut. The officers could no longer pretend neutrality. Their radios burst alive with orders from above, but the noise outside drowned it all. The house had become a stage and no one could hide. Their role. The false twin lunged for the door, but the crowd pressed forward, blocking him. their fury a wall stronger than glass. The officers seized Hale, dragging him back as he screamed legal codes that fell meaningless against the roar Aaron clutched. His sister, and looked up at his father, and the man in the suit bent down, pressing his forehead to his children's, a promise unspoken but strong. May felt tears sting her eyes. The house filled with a storm of justice breaking free after years of silence. The woman exhaled a sound that was part sob, part laugh, part release, as though chains had fallen invisible yet heavy. Then over the chaos a new voice carried from the street, deep booming official. This is the district attorney. All recordings, all notebooks, all testimony must be secured, and every officer here is now under command of my office. The crowd parted enough for the DA to step forward, flanked by investigators, his face stern, his eyes already scanning the scene. The false twin froze his bravado, cracking. Hale slumped against the officers, and the true man in the suit straightened like a man who had waited his entire life for this reckoning. But before the DA could speak, Lily raised her small voice one more time, trembling, but clear enough for microphones to catch. He hurt me, and the words landed like lightning. Silence followed. Even the cameras seemed to pause. The false twin sagged as if struck. Aaron tightened his arms around her, whispering, "You are safe now." The woman wrapped her children and her husband in her arms, tears streaming down her cheeks. May stepped close, holding them steady, while the DA signaled his team to collect evidence. The live stream caught it, all the world no longer in doubt. The false twin's eyes darted frantic. His last words hissed like a snake into the night. "You will destroy everything I built," and the true man in the suit replied, steady as a stone, "Sometimes what you built was never meant to stand." And with that, the officers placed cuffs on both Hale and the false twin. The crowd erupted again, but this time not in confusion, in triumph. Chants of justice rose, carrying into the night, as if to cleanse the air of years of lies. The DA turned to the true man in the suit and said, "We will need every page, every recording, every truth you have." And he nodded, holding his family close, his voice low, "But sure, you will have it all. But first, my children need peace." And the DA bowed his head once in respect, before guiding his team inside to begin their work. As the crowd thundered outside and the cameras streamed to the world, May looked at the children and saw in their eyes the beginning of healing, and in their father's face the weight of battles fought alone now, lifted by the light of truth. But deep inside she knew the story was not finished yet, because power rarely dies quietly, and vengeance often lingers like smoke after fire. And as the night pressed on the house that had once echoed with cries, now braced itself for the next storm that would come with the dawn. The night wrapped around the house like a shroud, while the crowd outside rumbled with chants of justice and truth, and flashing cameras painted the broken windows with strobing light. The DA's team worked inside methodical gloved hands, collecting drives, envelopes, and notebooks, while uniformed officers shifted uneasily under the weight of new orders. The false twin sat cuffed against the wall, his eyes still burning with calculation, though the charm had long since slipped away. Detective Hale slumped beside him, muttering half-formed legal threats that sounded smaller. With every word, Aaron clung to his father's side. Lily's small face pressed into her mother's shoulder. May stayed close, holding her breath against the aftershocks of everything that had already happened. The DA walked the length of the hallway, pausing at the shattered picture frames and the blood-stained note still lying on the table from earlier, his jaw clenched tight, his voice steady. "Bring me every record from that basement, lock it down. Chain of custody begins here tonight." The officers moved quickly, some grateful for the clarity, others hesitant to betray ties they had hidden for years. The false twin raised his voice smooth again, though stripped of its gold. "Neighbors do not understand legacies like mine, cannot be dismantled with whispers or tears." The DA turned sharply and cut him with a look harsh enough to silence an army. "You mistook silence for consent. Tonight the city heard the truth from the mouths of your victims." The crowd outside pressed harder, their shouts louder, until the DA ordered 2 officers to step out and calm the storm. One officer raised a hand and told the people justice is moving forward. Trust the process, but the chant grew anyway. The hunger for answers, now unstoppable. The journalist with her live feed raised her voice again, calling into the doorway. Tell us what will happen to the children. Now the cameras captured Aaron's wide eyes and Lily's fragile face. The DA paused before answering the family. Will be protected by law until the trial ends and beyond, and those who hid this crime behind power will face full prosecution. The false twin laughed a dry laugh that cut against the DA's promise. You cannot protect them from what comes next. I have friends you cannot even name and favors bound in signatures and secrets that never see daylight. You think you have won, but storms never end. The man in the suit turned on him with sudden force, his voice louder than the chants outside. You speak of storms, but storms cleanse the sky, and tonight you are nothing but debris. The crowd roared approval at those words, even though many could only hear echoes through broken glass. Detective Hale tried one last play, shouting that he had acted under orders, that his role was to secure wellness and safety. The words rang hollow, but he spat them with desperation. The DA answered, Cold wellness does not leave bruises, and safety does not echo with cries from children. Your badge will be stripped before dawn. Hale sagged against the wall, the fight draining from him. The false twin snarled at him, useless pawn. And Hale finally snapped, turning his head, spitting back. You promised protection. And the world now heard his admission. The cameras caught it. The live stream spread it. The chant of truth swelled louder. Inside the house, Aaron lifted the crescent key once more and whispered to his father, There is still more down there. I did not show them. All the man in the suit knelt eye level with his son, his tone soft yet serious. You have done enough tonight. Let the law carry the rest. Aaron shook his head, tears trembling in his eyes. They will twist it if we do not show everything. Lily lifted her small hand and touched the key, as if agreeing with her brother May. Watching felt her heart twist, the courage in children stronger than men trained to fight wars. The DA noticed the exchange and asked, Is there more evidence? The man in the suit hesitated, looking at his wife, then at May, then back to his children, finally nodding once. Yes, there is a second chamber beyond the vent, hidden deeper. The DA straightened jaw like steel. Then we go now, before any hand loyal to him erases it. The officers balked, exhausted, but obeyed. May carried Lily close behind the group as they descended once more into the belly of the house. The vent cover groaned. When Aaron slid it open, the crescent key turning smooth in the hidden slot behind it, another passage narrow dark, like a throat swallowing them whole. The air was colder, damper, filled with the scent of mold and something metallic. The group crept through flashlights trembling on the walls until they reached another door. This one heavy iron bolted with thick chains. Aaron held up the device. It pulsed blue, then green. The chains snapped loose with a hiss like steam, and the door groaned open. Inside, the second chamber, rows of filing cabinets stretched wall-to-wall, documents stacked in bundles, each marked with dates, accounts, signatures, even photographs pinned like trophies. Every envelope carried the crest of charities, schools, hospitals, every project the false twin had once claimed as generosity. And within them receipts, transfers, bribes, schedules, names of officers, politicians, reporters, all tied into a web of silence. The DA's team gasped at the sheer scale. One whispered, This is not just a case, this is a kingdom built on fear. The DA nodded, grim, his voice low. This is the heart of his empire. May felt her chest tighten as she read the names, ordinary families who had been silenced, signatures forced to vanish, stories erased for reputation's sake. Aaron stared wide-eyed, as if finally understanding that the pain in his own home had echoed in many others. The woman pressed her hand to her mouth, whispering, How could I have lived beside this and never seen it? The man in the suit placed his hand gently on hers, not as blame, but as solidarity. We see it now, and that is enough to end it. They began collecting documents, photographs, recordings, the DA assigning officers to guard every cabinet. One officer whispered, The city will burn when this goes public. Another answered, Maybe. But from the fire, something new grows. Aaron turned to his father, asked in a voice trembling, yet hopeful, Will it stop now? And his father answered, Nothing ever stops. But justice begins. Tonight, Above them, the chants grew louder. Footsteps on the porch, multiplied reporters shouting questions, neighbors demanding answers. The house shook, not with violence, but with the power of voices no longer afraid. May felt Lily stir in her arms. The little girl whispered, "Are we safe?" The woman kissed her forehead and said, "We are safer than we have ever been because the truth belongs to everyone. Now back upstairs." The false twin still smirked, though his wrists bore cuffs. His eyes met the DA's as the evidence was carried up, box after box. "You think you have buried me, but you have only planted me in soil where my friends will water me." The DA shot back seeds of poison. Never bloom again. In daylight, the cameras captured the exchange, and already the live stream spread it through phones and screens across the city. As the night stretched toward dawn, the family gathered in the living room, broken glass glittering around them. Yet for the first time, the silence did not ache with fear. The man in the suit sat with his children, Aaron leaning against his shoulder. Lily curled into his lap. The woman sat beside them, her hand linked with his. May stood nearby, watching the faces of neighbors pressed to the windows. Their anger. Turning to solidarity, the DA announced formally, "Charges will be filed by morning protective custody, for the family has been arranged." The journalist turned her camera back to the children, her voice firm to the world watching. Remember their faces, remember their courage, because justice began here. The false twin lowered his head, finally silent for the first time that night. Hale muttered curses that no one cared to hear. The officers finished logging the evidence the DA prepared to leave with his team. The crowd outside lit candles, raising them high, chanting not for him, but for the children, for every cry ignored until now. May felt her throat tighten, tears blurring her eyes, the sound of those voices healing something in her she had not known was broken. She looked at Aaron, saw his small shoulders straight, though weary. She looked at Lily, saw her tiny fingers finally unclenched. She looked at their father, saw strength weathered but unbroken. She looked at their mother, saw sorrow. Now laced with steel, she knew the night was not over. Trials would come, battles would follow, but a beginning had been carved into stone, and no lie could erase it. The DA's final words before stepping into the night carried through the room. Let the record show tonight the walls shook with cries, but they will stand tomorrow with truth. The family held each other. The crowd thundered, and though shadows still lingered beyond the horizon, dawn felt possible for the first time in years. The dawn broke pale and bruised over the city. The house that had trembled with screams through the night now sat quiet under a sky streaked with red and gold. The crowd outside thinned, at last replaced by quiet murmurs and scattered candles burning down. To Wax Pools, the DA's convoy had left hours earlier, carrying drives, notebooks, documents enough to shatter reputations and topple walls of power. The false twin and Detective Hale had been hauled away, cuffed, their final shouts drowned by the roar of neighbors and the click of cameras still. The echoes of that night clung to every corner of the house, the shards of broken glass glittering like reminders of what had cracked forever. Inside the living room, May sat with Lily resting in her lap, the little girl at last sleeping, her tiny chest rising steady. The streaks of tears still dried on her cheeks. Aaron leaned against his father, exhausted, but awake, stubborn eyes still fixed on the doorway as though guarding against shadows that might try to return. The woman sat beside them, shoulders slumped, but her hand firm in her husband's. He sat silent, eyes heavy yet alert, his jaw tight as though he carried the weight of years collapsed into one night. The silence was fragile, but it was no longer filled with fear. It was filled with the aftershocks of truth spoken aloud. May closed her eyes for a moment, hearing again the roar of the crowd, the chants of justice, the way Lily's small voice had carried through microphones, like lightning, and she knew the world would not forget soon. But she also knew healing would not be swift wounds carved deep, do not close in a day. When Aaron finally spoke, his voice was thin, but sure. What will happen now? His father drew in a breath. Long and steady trials, depositions, questions, cameras, people who will try to twist the story, but none of that matters as much as this. You and your sister are safe now. Aaron's small hands clenched into fists, his eyes wet, but unbroken. We fought. Back, he whispered. We made them hear us. His father pulled him close, pressing his forehead to his son's. Yes, you did, and I will never let your courage be forgotten. The woman turned her gaze to May, tears in her eyes. You stayed when others would have run. You stood in front of men who thought themselves untouchable. I do not know how to thank you. May shook her head. No, thanks is needed. I did what anyone should do. But her voice caught because she knew not everyone would have stayed, and in that moment, she felt something new stir inside her. Not pride, but responsibility. A promise to never again stand silent when a voice needed to be heard. As the morning stretched on, neighbors drifted back, bringing blankets. Food whispered words of comfort, candles still glowing in their hands. The same community that had once turned away now stood shoulder to shoulder, unafraid. May saw the change in their faces, the recognition that power can blind. But truth, when spoken, breaks the spell. The journalist returned, still streaming live. Her voice softer now than during the frenzy last night. She asked only one question to the family. What do you want the city to remember from this moment? The woman looked at her children, then at her husband, then at May, and said, Tell them that silence protects monsters. Tell them that fear builds cages, but truth, no matter how small, can shatter steel bars. And her words rippled through the cameras across the city, across screens where strangers paused to listen. Aaron added, his own voice steady. We are not invisible anymore. And Lily stirred awake, pressing her face to May, whispering safe before slipping back into sleep. The journalist lowered her phone. Her eyes wet. She whispered, Thank you then, stepped outside to speak to the world. Her words not just about scandal, but about courage, resilience, survival. The crowd listened not as gossip, but as testimony, and May felt the shift in the air, the way a city begins to heal when wounds are exposed and cleansed. Later, the DA returned with security teams, placing the family into protective custody. The house sealed as evidence they would not return here, at least not soon, as they packed a few belongings. Aaron carried the torn rabbit now, stitched clumsily by May. During the quiet hours, Lily clutched his hand, refusing to let go. The man in the suit lifted his daughter gently, his voice calm to her. We are leaving the Cries behind now. We will not let the walls hold them anymore. She nodded against his shoulder, small but brave. When the convoy pulled away, the crowd parted in silence, candles held high in respect. May watched from the window as faces blurred into a sea of witnesses no longer willing to be silent. The journalist walked at the front, phone raised, still streaming, still carrying the truth beyond the street, beyond the city, into the world. The trials came weeks later, broadcast into every home, the false twins' empire laid bare. The files from the basement, the voices on the recordings, the signatures on the envelopes, Hale's words captured on tape. The city gasped as each layer peeled back donations that were theft charities, that were prisons, hospitals, that were hunting grounds, every secret dragged into the light. The false twin tried to smile, tried to weave words, but the mask was broken. The world saw through, and the jury did not hesitate. The verdict thundered guilty. The sentence decades long. The empire collapsed. Hale, too, fell stripped of badge, title, respect. His curses drowned in the sound of gavels slamming. May watched from the gallery, her heart pounding as justice carved its path, her eyes never leaving the family seated together. The woman holding Lily, Aaron gripping his father's arm, the man in the suit steady at their center. They did not smile, but their eyes burned with a quiet fire that no judgment could extinguish. Afterward, life did not become simple scars, do not vanish. They live as reminders. But healing began. Aaron walked taller, no longer afraid to speak. Lily laughed sometimes without fear. Shadows still made her flinch, but each day she grew stronger. The woman volunteered for groups, teaching others to find courage. Her voice no longer silenced. May stayed. Close part of their circle, as though bound by blood, not by chance, the man in the suit rebuilt. Not an empire, but a home made of honesty and resilience. One evening months later, May stood with Aaron on a balcony overlooking the city lights. He asked, "Her, do you think people will forget?" May looked at him, his young face already aged by pain, yet burning with hope. "People forget names," she said, "but they do not forget lessons when they see courage. They carry it forward." He nodded slowly, holding the stitched rabbit close, then whispered, "I hope they carry Lily's voice because it was her cry that woke the world." May smiled soft. Yes, it was her cry that shook the walls, and her father's shout that stunned them all as stars blinked above the city. The family gathered together, holding each other not in fear but in strength. May knew this was the ending the story had carved from blood and silence into truth and survival, a lesson written not in books but in the hearts of everyone who had listened that night. And the lesson lingered. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find who you truly are. Sometimes silence is the heaviest chain, but once broken, it becomes the loudest cry. Sometimes the walls that shake with sorrow will one day stand as monuments to courage, and that night the world learned that truth when spoken by even the smallest voice can shatter even the most gilded lies. The end.